The president will be signing that executive order today, and steel and aluminum tariffs will be going to 50%.
Latest tariffs on steel and aluminum are unjustified. They're illegal. They're bad for American workers, bad for American industry, and of course for Canadian industry as well.
In just 48 hours, the world turned its back on America. One tariff. That's all it took. Donald Trump's sudden move to slap a 50% duty on all imported aluminum didn't just spark outrage, it detonated a global chain reaction. Key allies cut ties, contracts were canceled, entire supply chains shifted direction almost overnight. Canada, once America's closest partner in aluminum, didn't flinch. It didn't wait. It struck. Within hours, Ottawa unlocked billions in new investment, rerouted shipments to Europe and Asia, and positioned itself as the new anchor of the global aluminum market without the U.S. even in the room. Factories across America were still calculating the new costs when their overseas buyers were already gone. Aluminum, the metal that builds our cars, planes, beer cans, and homes, just became America's newest liability. How did one policy push the world to replace the U.S. so fast? And what happens when a country loses control of a supply chain it once dominated? If you're here, you're curious alike, helps this reach others who are too. Prices didn't just rise, they detonated. Within days of Trump's 50% tariff on imported aluminum, U.S. spot prices surged to 60 CAD per pound, or $1.323 per metric ton, a level not seen in years. But the spike wasn't just about market volatility, it was structural, fast, and devastating. The American aluminum market, long reliant on stable cross-border imports, was suddenly thrown into chaos. The first to fall was Alcoa. Once a symbol of U.S. industrial might, the company posted a staggering $115 million loss. Why? It couldn't pass the new tariff costs onto customers. With global buyers pulling back, Alcoa was forced to offload 100,000 tons of aluminum onto the international market, at a loss, a desperate move to stop the bleeding. But the fallout went far beyond a single company. According to Goldman Sachs, domestic aluminum costs could double within months, creating what analysts now call a perfect storm. Tightened supply, surging logistics costs, and hoarding behavior among manufacturers have already begun distorting the entire supply chain. Warehouse stockpiles are thinning. Spot contracts are drying up. Everyone's trying to lock in prices before they rise again. And it's not just aluminum. When combined with parallel spikes in steel import costs, could balloon by $52.6 billion annually. That cost won't stay in the factories. It will hit consumers hard. From automakers to home builders, from soda companies to electronics manufacturers, producers are already warning of rising prices across the board. A can of beer, a new car, a kitchen appliance. All more expensive not because of scarcity, but because of policy. What was meant to punish foreign rivals is now punishing American businesses and households instead. This story's still unfolding. Subscribe to follow how it all plays out. The price shock was only the first blow. The real damage came when entire industries started breaking under the weight. With aluminum costs doubling and supplies tightening, manufacturers across America were forced to make impossible choices, absorb the losses, raise prices, or shut down, and many simply couldn't keep up. In the beer industry, where aluminum cans are the lifeblood of distribution, producers reported cost increases of $8,000 to $20,000 within just 6 months. For smaller breweries, that's enough to erase profit margins entirely. For larger ones, it means higher shelf prices and shrinking demand. Canning and packaging companies responsible for everything from soup to soft drinks sounded the alarm early. If prices don't stabilize, one executive warned, we'll be forced to pass every cent to consumers. Grocery bills will go up fast. And then came the shutdowns. Across the automotive, aerospace, and even defense sectors, factory floors began to go quiet. Unable to source reliable aluminum at predictable prices, automakers delayed production runs, aircraft assembly lines paused, and defense contractors issued warnings about delays in critical components. These aren't luxury goods, they're the backbone of American industry. The ripple effects of the tariff aren't theoretical. They're hitting real companies, real workers, and real families right now, and it's only getting worse. This is what happens when a key input becomes a wild card in the system. What's next when even the most basic materials are no longer guaranteed? While U.S. factories scrambled to adjust to soaring aluminum costs, Canada was already sealing new deals and locking America out. Almost overnight, Ottawa moved to capitalize on the chaos. In a series of high-level negotiations, Canada signed multi-billion-dollar aluminum supply agreements with the European Union and key Asian economies. These weren't temporary fixes. These were long-term strategic realignments designed to reroute the flow of global aluminum away from the United States entirely. Over 3 million metric tons of Canadian aluminum once destined for American buyers have now been redirected to new partners. Shipments that would have flowed effortlessly across the border are now headed to Hamburg, Rotterdam, Tokyo, and Seoul. The U.S., once the automatic first stop for Canadian metal, is no longer even on the preferred list. And the message to the world couldn't be clearer. Canada is stable. Canada is reliable. The U.S. too risky. This isn't just about trade, it's about trust. And when global industries begin rewriting supply chains without you regaining that trust, is nearly impossible. The U.S. didn't just lose a market, it lost its seat at the table. As global buyers pivoted away and Canadian exports surged abroad, U.S. factories were left paralyzed, strangled by soaring prices and a supply chain they no longer controlled. The aluminum tariff meant to spark a domestic revival instead delivered chaos. With prices unstable and imports drying up, American manufacturers were forced to delay production schedules and cancel export orders. For many, the numbers simply didn't work. Even producers with stockpiled aluminum like Alcoa couldn't catch a break. The company estimated it would need an additional 75 CAS per pound in Midwest premium just to break even. And even that wasn't enough to cover the cost shock triggered by the tariff. Their warehouses were full, yet losses kept piling up. Across the country, the damage spread like wildfire. Appliance makers shelved expansion plans. Textile factories relying on aluminum equipment paused orders. Home builders reconsidered projects mid-design. Automakers quietly pulled out of supply agreements, citing unpredictable input costs. The logic was brutal. Why invest millions when tomorrow's material costs could blow up your margins? Entire sectors now face the grim reality that their investments, once solid long-term bets, have become financial sinkholes overnight. When your supply is uncertain and your price base is broken, every machine you turn on becomes a risk. And for U.S. industry, that risk is quickly becoming a reason to shut down. The crisis didn't stay inside the factories. It's now rippling across the entire economy and heading straight for consumers. When aluminum prices surged and production lines stalled, the disruption wasn't just a headache for manufacturers, it became a warning bell for the entire financial system. The Federal Reserve responded quickly, issuing an internal alert that rising input costs, especially in metals, were driving what it called accelerated inflationary pressure. According to their projections, inflation is set to spike again by late summer 2025, with aluminum acting as a key trigger. And it's not just one or two sectors sounding the alarm, it's nearly every corner of the economy that touches aluminum. Canned food producers are already raising prices, citing packaging shortages and longer lead times. Your grocery bill doesn't just reflect what's in the can, it reflects the can itself. Automakers who had just started recovering from the supply chain chaos of previous years now warn that prices for new vehicles could rise sharply again, erasing recent gains in affordability. Construction firms are scrambling to revise bids as aluminum-based components like window frames, siding, roofing, and fixtures become impossible to price with any certainty. Even the pharmaceutical industry, often seen as insulated, is feeling the squeeze. Aluminum plays a critical role in medical packaging, particularly in cold chain and sterile environments. With costs spiking and availability uncertain, some firms are beginning to delay product launches or rework packaging designs, changes that could ultimately affect both availability and cost to consumers. This isn't isolated inflation. It's a cascading chain reaction moving from factory input costs to warehouse inventories and then to the end consumer. Supermarket shelves, dealership lots, construction sites, and pharmacies are all part of the same system. When the foundation cracks, the shock travels fast. And unlike past inflationary spikes, this one isn't the result of overstimulated demand. It's structural. It's political. It's the direct consequence of weaponizing tariffs without preparing for their blowback. What began as a policy aimed at foreign rivals is now quietly bleeding into the daily lives of millions of Americans in their groceries, their homes, their cars, and their health. And with every price tag that rises, trust in the system falls a little further. What began as a tariff is now unraveling something far more critical: America's credibility. For decades, the United States was seen as the bedrock of global trade, stable, predictable, rules-based. But that perception is quickly fading. The aluminum tariff didn't just rattle markets, it sent a chilling message to America's allies and trading partners. U.S. policy can flip overnight, and entire industries can be upended without warning. One European trade minister described it bluntly: "You can't run a factory or secure a contract when the rules change mid-shipment." From Tokyo to Berlin, international firms have begun reassessing risk, not just economic, but political. The U.S. is now increasingly viewed as a high-volatility partner, where decisions driven by domestic politics can override long-term commitments or supply stability. And as America's reliability falters, Canada is stepping into the vacuum. In quiet contrast to Washington's unpredictability, Ottawa is offering what global manufacturers crave: consistency. Canada's trade officials have been working around the clock to reassure partners, lock in multi-year aluminum supply deals, and present the country as a stable, long-term node in the global supply chain. Their message is resonating. Buyers are shifting contracts. Insurers are adjusting risk models. Investors are moving capital. The result: Canada's aluminum sector is booming not just because of capacity, but because of confidence. And that's what the U.S. is losing most rapidly: not resources, not even just contracts, but trust. And in geopolitics and global trade, trust is leverage. Once it's gone, it's nearly impossible to rebuild. So where does this all lead? If a single tariff can trigger an industry-wide shutdown, sever global contracts, and push allies into the arms of competitors, what happens the next time America throws a punch? If this made you think, give it a like. And if you want more, like and subscribe.